Sylviane, you've never run anything in your life. The only reason you're standing in this building is because you had the sense to marry someone who actually matters here. Dorian Ashcroft said it without lowering his voice. He said it in the middle of the Pemberton Grand's main lobby, surrounded by the hotel's senior staff, 2 visiting investors from Vancouver, and his own father, who sat in the leather chair near the concierge desk, pretending to read a newspaper. Sylviane Renner Ashcroft, 37-year-old wife of Dorian Ashcroft, and the quietly held controlling owner of the Renner Hospitality Group, 12 heritage hotels across Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia, valued at $900 million, stood in a grey wool coat with her hands folded in front of her and said nothing. She had learned, over 8 years of marriage, that silence was not agreement. It was observation. The lobby of the Pemberton Grand smelled of cedar and white tea. The floors were original terrazzo from 1932. The chandeliers above the entrance hall had been restored by her grandmother's hands. Sylviane knew this because her grandmother, Odile Renner, had told her the story 16 times before she died. Once for every year, Sylviane spent believing that belonging somewhere did not require announcing yourself. Dorian had turned back to the investors before Sylviane finished her breath. Beside him stood Isolde Carmichael, 35-year-old vice president of acquisitions at Carmichael Group Developments and Dorian's business partner in the deal he had been quietly building for 4 months, the same deal Sylviane's internal advisors had flagged 3 weeks ago. Isolde wore a dark burgundy blazer and smiled at the investors the way people smile when they believe a room belongs to them. Her hand rested near Dorian's sleeve. Not touching, just near, Sylviane noticed. She noticed the way Dorian laughed too easily at Isolde said. She noticed how Isolde never quite met her eyes. She noticed the investor from Vancouver, a man named Bernard Fitch, 58-year-old senior partner at Pacific Holdings, glance between Dorian and Isolde with the comfortable familiarity of men who had been briefed on a situation that did not include the wife. Sylviane picked up the folder she had set down on the concierge counter. Inside it was a routine maintenance report for the Pemberton Grand's East Wing. She had come to review it personally because the wing had been closed since October and the reopening was scheduled for the spring gala. The same gala Dorian had recently informed her she would not need to attend. She walked toward the east corridor without a word. The staff watched her go. An older bellman near the elevator bank, Gaspard, 62-year-old senior attendant, who had worked at the Pemberton Grand since the hotel was still under Odile Renner's personal management, straightened when she passed. He did not say anything, he simply removed his cap for a half-second, the way men of a certain age do when they recognize someone who has earned it. Sylviane had been coming to this hotel since she was 4 years old. The east wing smelled of fresh plaster and old wood. She walked through the corridor slowly, touching the wallpaper at one seam where the restoration team had matched the original pattern almost perfectly. Almost, she found the place where the repeat was off by 3 millimeters. She noted it in her folder. Her mother would have caught it in half the time. Her grandmother would not have needed to touch it at all. The Renner Hospitality Group had never been managed like a corporation. It had been managed like a responsibility. Odile had built the first hotel in 1961 from a loan no bank wanted to approve, in a city that did not particularly want her to succeed. She had made it work by knowing every room, every staff member, every guest complaint, and every repair that had been deferred too long. When Odile died, she left the controlling interest not to Sylviane's mother, who had remarried and moved to Portugal, but to Sylviane directly through the Renner Family Trust, a legal structure quiet enough that most people in the industry still did not know it existed. Sylviane had kept it that way on purpose. She had married Dorian when he was an ambitious junior executive at a commercial real estate firm, charming and hungry, in a way she found interesting before she understood. It was not ambition directed outward, but appetite directed inward. She had given him a senior operations role at the group because he asked for it, and she believed then that love meant offering a person the ground they needed to grow. He had used that ground to make himself feel tall. By the 3rd year of their marriage, he had started referring to the group as our business, in rooms where Sylviane was not present. By the 5th, he had taken to introducing himself at industry events as the driving force behind the Renner portfolio. By the 7th, Sylviane had started receiving quiet reports from her legal counsel, Marguerite Doyle, 51-year-old lead attorney for the Renner Trust, that certain proposals were moving through the group's internal system without proper trust-level authorization. She had not confronted Dorian. She had started paying attention. The East Wing corridor ended at a set of original oak doors that opened into the Pemberton Grand's Heritage Suite, the largest room in the hotel restored to its 1930s configuration, with a view across the harbor and walls lined with photographs of every significant gathering the hotel had hosted since its opening. Sylviane stood in the center of the room and looked at the photographs. Her grandmother in 1967, shaking hands with a premier, her mother in 1989, accepting an award for hospitality excellence. Sylviane herself at 14, standing in this same room after a function, wearing a navy dress her grandmother had chosen, holding a glass of sparkling water and listening to a conversation she was not old enough to fully understand, but old enough to remember. She had been quiet at 14 for the same reason she was quiet now. Not because she had nothing to say, because she was listening for what people believed when they thought she could not hear them. Her phone vibrated. A message from Marguerite. The Pacific Holdings meeting is confirmed for tomorrow. Dorian presented the proposal this morning without notifying the trust office. We need to talk tonight. Sylviane locked her screen. She already knew about the Pacific Holdings meeting. She had known about it for 11 days. What she had not known, until this morning, was that Dorian had listed himself on the proposal documents as primary operational authority for the Renner Hospitality Group. Not as senior director, not as a representative, as primary authority. As though the trust did not exist, as though her grandmother's legal architecture had simply been forgotten or had never mattered. She looked at the photograph of Odile in 1967. The same hands, the same stillness in the eyes. Hide the weight until you know who wants to carry it with you, and who only wants to put it down somewhere convenient. Odile had told her that at 11 years old in the kitchen of the original Renner property in Kingston. Sylviane had not understood it then either. The heritage suite door opened behind her. Dorian stood in the frame. He looked at her for a moment, the grey coat, the folder, the harbor beyond the glass, and something moved across his face that was not quite guilt. It was the look of a man who has decided that the thing he has done is already done, and therefore no longer requires examination. I thought you were reviewing the maintenance report, he said. I am, Sylviane said. She did not turn around. He walked into the room. The East Wing restoration is running behind schedule by 4 days, she said. It will be ready before the gala. Dorian stopped near the center of the room. About the gala, he said. His voice carried something careful in it, the way voices do when a decision has already been made and the speaker is only now deciding how to announce it. I've been thinking it might be better if the hospitality duties were handled by someone with more of a public presence this year. Isolde's team does extraordinary event work. It would position the group better with the Pacific investors. Sylviane turned around then. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the man he had been in the early years. Genuinely uncertain, genuinely trying, coming home tired and asking her questions about the industry because he actually wanted to learn. She had loved that version of him enough to think it was permanent. She had not understood then that a person's hunger does not disappear when you feed it. Sometimes it only grows a mouth. The gala has been run by Renner family representatives for 31 consecutive years, she said. Traditions evolve, Dorian said. Some do, she said, and she picked up her folder and walked past him out of the room. That night, Sylviane did not go to the apartment they shared in the east annex of the Pemberton Grand's residential wing. She went to the original Renner office on the 4th floor, a room that most current staff did not know existed, accessible by a key she had carried since she was 22. Inside it smelled of lemon oil and old paper, a single desk, 2 chairs, a wooden cabinet with brass fittings that contained, among other things, the original deed to the first Renner property, her grandmother's handwritten correspondence with the trust attorneys, and a sealed letter Odile had left for a time Sylviane would recognize when it arrived. The envelope was labeled in her grandmother's careful script, "When they confuse your patience for permission." Sylviane sat down at the desk. She did not open it yet. She called Marguerite first. Marguerite answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm in the way it always was when the situation had become serious enough to require it. The Pacific Holdings proposal, Sylviane said. What exactly did he represent to them? That he holds operational authority over all 12 properties, Marguerite said. He used his director title, but the language implies full ownership control. Bernard Fitch's team will have read it that way. And the trust documentation? Not mentioned, not attached, not referenced. Sylviane was quiet for a moment. Outside the 4th floor window, the harbor lights moved on the water. There's more, Marguerite said. Our internal audit director, Nevin Clarkson, 44-year-old head of finance review for the group, has been reviewing the third-party access records. The Carmichael Group has received provisional routing of 4 reservation systems across the western properties. Dorian approved it as an operational integration. It was never brought to the trust level when. 6 weeks ago, Sylviane looked at her grandmother's letter on the desk. 6 weeks ago, she had been in Calgary reviewing the renovation plans for the Renner's Western flagship. Dorian had called her twice during that trip, once to ask about the east wing plaster, once to tell her she was working too hard and should come home early. He had not mentioned the Carmichael integration. Pull everything, Sylviane said. Every approval he's run in the last 6 months. Any third-party access, any external representation, any document where his name appears as a decision-maker above director level. It'll take until morning, Marguerite said. That's fine, Sylviane said. The Pacific meeting isn't until noon. She hung up and sat in the quiet room for a long moment. Then she opened the envelope. Her grandmother's handwriting was small and precise, the handwriting of someone who had learned to put a great deal into limited space. Sylviane, if you are reading this, someone has mistaken your generosity for an absence of authority. Do not confuse the correction of this with punishment. Punishment is about what was done to you. What you owe the properties, the staff, and the guests is more important than that. Protect the work. The rest will correct itself. Sylviane read it twice. Then she set it down on the desk beside her folder. The maintenance notice about the wallpaper repeat was still visible at the top. 3 millimeters off. She had flagged it for correction. Everything correctable eventually got corrected. The morning of the Pacific Holdings meeting, Dorian arrived at the Pemberton Grand, wearing a dark suit and confidence that had not yet noticed. The room had changed around it. He walked through the lobby, nodded at the front desk staff, and took the elevator to the second-floor boardroom where the Pacific investors were already waiting. He had arranged the meeting himself. He had chosen the room himself. He had set the agenda. What he had not done was check whether the trust office had been notified of any of it. It had. By someone other than Dorian. Sylviane arrived at 9:57. She was not wearing grey wool. She wore a dark jacket with a small enamel pin at the lapel. A fine gold rendering of the Renner property crest, the one her grandmother had commissioned in 1974 for senior trust representatives. She carried a leather document case that had belonged to Odile. She did not rush. She did not announce herself in the lobby. She simply walked through it, and the older staff who recognized the pin understood before the younger ones could ask. Gaspard was at his station near the elevator. He saw the pin and the case and the particular quality of stillness in her face, and he straightened fully, the way he had not straightened for anyone in a very long time. Miss Renner, he said quietly. Not Mrs. Ashcroft, Miss Renner. Sylviane nodded once and went upstairs. The boardroom had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Bernard Fitch, 58, sat at the far end of the table with 2 associates beside him. Dorian was at the near end mid-sentence when the door opened. Isolde Carmichael sat to Dorian's right in a black blazer, a portfolio open in front of her, her expression professionally bright. Marguerite entered first, then Nevin, with 3 audit folders held in front of him, then Sylviane. Dorian's sentence stopped. Bernard Fitch looked up. His eyes moved from Marguerite to Sylviane, then to the document case, then back to Sylviane's face. Something reorganized itself in his expression, the particular adjustment of a man who has just understood that the meeting he thought he was attending was not the meeting that was actually occurring. Mrs. Renner, Marguerite said clearly. The trust has quorum. The board proxy is confirmed. Dorian looked at Marguerite, then at Sylviane. What is this? Sylviane set her document case on the table. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Good morning, Mr. Fitch. I apologize that we have not met properly before today. I'm Sylviane Renner. I hold controlling interest in the Renner Hospitality Group through the Renner Family Trust. I understand you've been reviewing a proposal regarding a strategic partnership with the Carmichael Group. Bernard Fitch set down his pen. I have, he said carefully. I'd like to discuss that proposal, Sylviane said, because several elements of it were presented to you without trust-level authorization, and some of the representations made about operational authority are not accurate. The boardroom went very quiet. Dorian pushed back from the table slightly. Sylviane, you represented yourself as the primary operational authority for 12 properties, Sylviane said, without turning toward him. Her voice was even, not cold, not shaking, just precise, the way her grandmother's handwriting was precise. The Renner Family Trust holds controlling voting authority over all strategic decisions above director level. That includes external partnerships, reservation system integrations, and third-party access agreements. She looked at Isolde then for the first time, all of which have been activated in some form over the past 6 weeks without trust notification. Isolde's portfolio closed slowly beneath her hands. I was told those approvals had been secured, Isolde said. Her voice was careful, but there was something underneath the careful that was starting to shift. They were not, Marguerite said. Director-level approvals were issued. Trust-level authorization was not obtained and was not disclosed as outstanding. Bernard Fitch looked at Dorian. Dorian looked at the table. Nevin opened the first folder. The screen at the end of the room lit with a document timeline. 6 months of approval records, access grants, integration requests, and external representations. Each entry was dated. Each entry showed Dorian's name beside an authority designation he did not hold. Bernard Fitch's associate leaned over and said something quietly near his ear. Bernard nodded once slowly and picked up his pen again. Not to sign anything. To make a note. The reservation system integration across the Western properties, Nevin said. Activated on October 14th, approved under an operational integration designation. The Carmichael Group's access was provisioned to 4 properties without guest data privacy review, trust-level sign-off, or disclosure of the personal relationship between the approving director and the Carmichael Group's vice president of acquisitions. The word personal landed in the room like a door closing. Isolde's chin lifted. That relationship is a professional one. Marguerite opened a second document. A communications log appeared on screen. The timestamp was from a corporate device. The content was a message thread between Dorian's registered Renner Group email and an account registered to Isolde Carmichael personally. It had been captured during the audit of the integration approval process on a system where all external communications carried an automatic notice of monitoring. No one had to read it aloud. The room understood. Bernard Fitch set down his pen again. Dorian stood up. This is being misrepresented. There was nothing improper. The integration access, Sylviane said quietly, gave the Carmichael Group visibility into proprietary guest data, room rate structures, and forward booking patterns across 4 of our highest revenue properties. She paused. The Carmichael Group is in direct competition with our Quebec portfolio in the boutique segment. Mr. Fitch, I think you understand what that access would be worth to a competitor. Bernard looked at his associate again. The associate gave a very small nod. I'd like to table this discussion, Bernard said. He was not angry. He was careful in the way that experienced men become careful when they realize they have come very close to something that would have been a serious problem. I'd like to review the documentation independently before we proceed further. Of course, Sylviane said. She slid a folder across the table, a full audit summary, prepared that morning, clean and tabbed. Our trust legal office is available for any questions. Dorian sat back down. His face had lost the particular quality it had carried when he walked in. The confident architecture of it had not collapsed all at once. It had simply become very still. Isolde was the first to move. She closed her portfolio fully, slid it off the table into her lap, and looked at the harbor through the window with the expression of someone counting the distance to an exit. Beside her, her own assistant was very carefully not looking at anything. Bernard Fitch and his team thanked Sylviane, shook Marguerite's hand, and left the boardroom in the polite efficiency of people who have decided they would like to be somewhere else. The door closed. For a moment, only Dorian, Isolde, Sylviane remained. Dorian looked at Sylviane. The calculation in his face had not gone anywhere, but there was something new beneath it now, something that looked, briefly, like the beginning of understanding. You've been watching this entire time, he said. Sylviane picked up her grandmother's document case. I've been waiting to see what you would do when you thought you were unobserved. Dorian's mouth opened and then closed. He had things he could have said. Sylviane watched him sort through them and find that none of them were structurally sound. Isolde gathered her things without speaking and left the room. Her footsteps in the hall were quick and even. Nevin followed to ensure the access credentials were revoked from the reservation systems before end of day. Marguerite stayed. Dorian looked at Sylviane across the length of the boardroom table. He looked at her the way men look at things they believed they understood and have just discovered they did not. Not with anger, exactly. With the specific discomfort of a person who has been wrong about something for a very long time and can feel the wrongness arranging itself into a shape too large to dismiss. I thought you didn't care, he said. The words came out quieter than he had probably intended. About the business side of it. You always seemed distant, Sylviane said. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I was paying attention, she said, to everything. The way you introduced yourself at industry events. The way you stopped asking me questions. The way you started referring to properties by name without walking them first. She looked at him steadily. I was paying attention to whether you were growing into this or simply taking up space in it. Dorian lowered his eyes. Marguerite laid a folder gently on the table near Sylviane. Sylviane did not pick it up. She already knew what was in it. The trust has prepared an authority clarification filing, Sylviane said. Effective immediately, your directorial designation is suspended pending a full review of the past 12 months of approvals. Your system access is being restricted to read-only while the audit completes. The Carmichael integration is frozen and the external access revoked. Dorian looked up sharply. That will raise questions with the Vancouver team. Yes, Sylviane said, it will. He understood then that she was not protecting his reputation in this, not out of cruelty, out of accuracy. The cover had cost the company. The cover was not something she owed him. What about us, he said. The question was smaller than everything else in the room, but it was the only one left that was genuinely his. Sylviane looked at him for a long time. She thought about the man he had been before he had learned to take up her space. She thought about the evening she had told him, early in their marriage, that she sometimes felt the weight of the inheritance like something she did not know how to put down. He had taken her hand that night and said, "Then let me carry some of it with you." She had believed him. She had believed that love could be a form of distribution, that sharing a life meant sharing the weight, not transferring it. She understood now that he had not wanted to carry anything. He had wanted to hold the thing that looked like the most and let her carry the rest out of sight. "I don't know yet," she said. It was the most honest answer she had. But that conversation belonged somewhere other than a boardroom. She picked up her case and her folder and she walked out. The lobby was busier by the time she reached it. Late morning light came through the heritage windows and lay across the terrazzo in long pale stripes. Staff moved through it with the particular efficiency of people in a building that has been working well for a very long time. Gaspard was at his station. He saw her face as she crossed the lobby. Not broken, not triumphant, just clear, the way faces look when something has been resolved that was long overdue. And he nodded once, slowly, with the quiet respect of a man who had watched 3 generations of Renner women walk through this building and knew the difference between a guest and the person the building belonged to. Sylviane stopped at the concierge counter. "The wallpaper in the East Wing Heritage Suite," she said. "Third panel from the north door. The pattern repeat is 3 millimeters off." The concierge, young, professional, slightly startled, opened his notebook immediately. "I'll have the restoration team correct it today," he said. "Before the gala," Sylviane said, "please." She walked toward the harbor entrance. Outside, the November sky over the water was the deep grey blue that belonged specifically to Ontario at the edge of winter, the kind of sky that looked like it was holding something and had been for a very long time. In the weeks that followed, the audit completed. The numbers were not catastrophic, but they were significant enough to matter. The Carmichael Group's provisional access was formally revoked. Isolde's firm released a brief statement about the withdrawal of the partnership proposal, citing a mutual reassessment of strategic priorities. No one publicly mentioned the communications log. The trust did not ask them to. Discretion in Sylviane's experience was not the same as protection. It was a choice about what served the work and what only served the wound. Dorian moved out of the residential annex before the review concluded. He sent 2 messages, one formal, through his own attorney, regarding the directorial role, and one personal from his own phone at 11:30 on a Thursday evening that simply read, "I think I knew you were the building and told myself I was the architect. I'm sorry it took me this long to understand the difference." Sylviane read it twice. She did not respond immediately. She sat with it the way her grandmother had taught her to sit with things that deserved more than a reflex, understanding that sorrow and accountability were not the same as repair, and that forgiveness, if it came, would come in its own time and on terms that had nothing to do with his schedule. The spring gala was held on the first Friday of April. The east wing of the Pemberton Grand opened on schedule. The wallpaper repeat in the Heritage Suite had been corrected. The guests who moved through the room that evening did not notice it. They were not supposed to. That was the point. Sylviane stood near the entrance to the Heritage Hall and watched the room fill. The Renner crest pin was at her lapel. Her grandmother's document case was back in the 4th floor office where it belonged. The portrait of Odile Renner, the original commission from 1971, which had been in storage since a lobby renovation in 2018, had been restored and rehung in the Heritage Hall 3 days before the gala, at Sylviane's instruction. Odile looked out from it with the same particular quality Sylviane had spent most of her life trying to understand. Not sternness, not pride exactly, but the clear-eyed calm of someone who had built something worth protecting and knew the difference between the people who loved the building and the people who only loved what the building meant for them. Gaspard appeared at Sylviane's elbow with a glass of sparkling water, the same thing she had held at 14 in this same room. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Sylviane looked at her grandmother's portrait for a moment, then she looked at the room, the staff, the guests, the light on the terrazzo, the harbor through the restored east windows, and she felt for the first time in a long time that she was standing in a place that knew her back. She had not taken anything that did not belong to her. She had not needed to. She had only stopped allowing other people to mistake her patience for an absence. The building had always been hers. She had simply needed to remember that holding a thing quietly was not the same as letting it go.